This is the March 20, 2018 meeting of Finance and Warrant Commission. Welcome, everyone. Westwood Media Center is here, Connor is here, and we grant permission to record the meeting. Is there anyone else who would like to record the meeting? I see no affirmative responses. With that, if I could ask everyone to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. So tonight we will be presenting the subcommittee reports from the commission, in addition to the work that we do at our meetings. Throughout the year, our subcommittees work very hard to drill down on their particular subject areas, be it municipal, education, OPEB, long range. And I want to thank our members for all the hard work that they've done. I'd like to also thank Julie Bride, who is the chair of the Municipal Committee and has done great work in that role along with her committee members. And we're going to start with your report, Julie. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to start by telling you a little bit about the process we do for the budget, and then we'll break it down, trying to keep it conversational. Peter Lenz, Tom Gareth, Chris Paff, and Howard Messing, the five of us make up the municipal subcommittee team. So you'll hear from all of us tonight. Just by way of the process, just so we can be transparent, the way that this works is we receive information from the town in probably late January that are you can see the binders on the desk, two key pieces of information. One is the operating report, and the other is the capital plan for the town. We have time then to review those materials in addition to information that Pam has shared with us in meetings before really a sprint that happens in late February into early March, where we meet with all the department heads. So we do have an opportunity to review the information, prepare for our meetings. We send questions ahead of time and sit down for close to an hour with each department head to go through the accomplishments of the prior year and go through the forward-looking proposal for budget. So it's really how we come at this budget review for the municipal subcommittee. Make sense? This year's budget, as you know, is over $20 million, which is, as Pam noted a couple of weeks ago, it's 3%. It's a little over 3% from fiscal year 18. I just want to spell out, because it took me a little bit to go back and understand the math. Last year's budget the proposed budget for last year was the $19,462,436 that we reviewed in the municipal subcommittee. What happened is there was an article to approve $570,000 to be spent on public safety positions in fiscal year 18. So the actuals for last year are the $20,032,436. So if we were to take last year's proposed budget to this year's proposed budget, it's closer to a 6% delta. But now that we've added $570,000 in public safety positions over the course of 18, it's closer to 3%. Does that make sense? That number? Okay. It still keeps us in the range where is this echoing? Maybe it's just me getting feedback, sorry. 73% of the operating budget is on salaries, 27% on expenses, and that's stayed consistent for the last few years or more. And then the breakdown we have in the pie chart, this as well as stayed consistent across departments. There has been, and it started last year, kind of a reallocation or grouping of funds where we've now pulled out community and economic development that Nora leads as its own category, and we cluster library, rec, and some other departments. So here's what we learned when it broke down. You'll see I've added, the slides have been slightly updated since the copies were made. But what you see in the salaries from fiscal year proposed to actual, the addition of the $570,000 for public safety. When we look at actual to proposed 19, it's 3% change in salaries and a little over 3% increase in expenses. So what's driving that? Most of it is due to, I'm sorry, I hit the thing, due to the cost of living step increases. There are proposed 2 positions to be added, an admin role that will move from part-time to full-time at Council on Aging, and some new library positions for 19. On the expense side, we have some custodial expenses, and this will be detailed as each of us goes through the respective departments. So Howard will tell you more about how the Department of Public Work is impacted by the custodial expenses. There's an IT software cost that's gone up close to 12%, the licensing fee, and that covers the town and school, not just the municipal side of it. Town clerk has an increase in the election schedule, and that's just the number of elections that are happening over the course of fiscal year 19. State, a primary, a state election, a town election. That's it. Annual town election, and then some early voting costs for that. The increase is not due to the voting system that was looked at. That is not built into this year's budget, the idea of using the voting system at the annual town election. Some printing costs for FinCom and printing costs for library materials. And then there was a reduction of about $42,000 in expenses that was moved to the municipal capital budget. So the total budget increase is about $175,000. Again, in line with what we've seen in past years. So with that, I'll turn it over to Peter to talk about the fire department.
So in terms of the fire department, we met with the chief. The chief was under the disadvantage of not being here for all that long, but he had to put together the budget pretty quickly, and I think he did a very detailed job. He didn't just say, hey, I'm new here, let me just add 3%, which is close to the target. It was a very detailed look. There was some savings associated with salaries when you look at some of the new folks versus what the older folks that have been replaced are. So there was some savings there, and the operating expenses are relatively flat. So that all results in a relatively small increase versus target this year. So we didn't actually ask a huge amount of questions associated with that. We wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the new programs that the chief is trying to put together. So he's doing a lot of different things. He's doing and implementing some new initiatives, the peak level and surge level staffing, so that he's going to have more people available when they're more needed. He's got a very metrics-driven approach to this, and that's one of the reasons why he came up with the peak level and surge level staffing. One of his priorities is to get the fire department out there and more visible to the town, and he's got some different programs that we highlight here. And he's also, another initiative is empowering his own employees with the expression that he has, see it, own it, solve it, and do it. So some innovative things are being done there, which is great. We also took a look at metrics, and as I said before, the chief is very metrics driven, but some of the metrics he's working on, they're kind of difficult to come up with right now. Actually, when we looked at the calls were actually slightly down this year, but that really didn't give the whole story. When you think of, since University Station has happened, the calls have generally gone very much up. And so the chief looked at not just 16 to 17, he wanted to look at just the first 2 months of actuals of 17 to 18. And when that was looked at, there was about an increase of 20% on the calls. So definitely continuing an activity of calls being up. And still, University Station takes a big chunk of the fire department's efforts. In terms of capital investments, there's kind of two different types of capital investment or funding of capital investment, some through the municipal capital plan using free cash. And those are pretty much planned things that, as I've listed here, that have been planned for a while. And then also some additional things for ambulance, and those are funded through ambulance receipts. So pretty much mostly the things that wanted to be done, but you won't see here the refurbishment of Station 1. That's something that's been deferred until later time. Any questions on that? Okay.
Peter, I have a question either for you or perhaps the chief. In past years, we've spent a lot of time talking about what the staffing levels are in Station 1 and 2, and I see there's a bullet there relative to peak level and surge level staffing. I wonder if one of you could just talk about what the staffing levels are throughout the day at Station 1 and 2.
Yeah. Let me talk first overall staffing, then I'll let the chief jump in because he knows 100% more than me. But there is going to be some reductions in staff because some people are leaving or have left due to great opportunities that they found in other towns. And so the chief is going to be going out and replacing those positions. But in terms of peak and surge level, I think because that's your program, chief, I think that would be best for you to talk about.
Okay, the idea of the peak level staffing looks at call volume throughout the day. And what we looked at was almost an 8-year trend pattern. And what we were seeing is between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., a steady growth of every hour that we looked at. It was about 100 calls over the year would fall in that time frame. So I picked 100 as being the trigger for where we might need peak level staffing. So then I also looked at what our EMS calls were doing, our emergency medical service calls, and their peak was really between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. So what we did was we instituted a process where we actually hire in overtime to cover that 6 or 7 hour window, and we flex it we'll flex it throughout the year based on the call volume. So we may find during the summer, where right now we're busy enough, I staff up to 9 people between that 8 a.m. and 3. During the summer, I may shift it back down to 8 or even 7. Or if we find the call volume is so big, we shift it up in the other direction. I don't see that right now, the need to shift up. And then later on in fiscal 19, the surge level staffing is 2 positions that we're looking to promote, one being a training captain and a fire prevention officer, one position, and an EMS supervisor who will work Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, 9 to 6, however that works out. And during their time there, they'll have a main function, but when the call volume needs it, they'll surge from their position to cover the need in the community, opposed to what we do now where we call back. If I'm running at 7 and we, ship people to the hospital and we're short-staffed, they do a callback. So I could get 11 people coming back in, and I don't really need 11, but we can't just hope that, only 2 will show up. So that's why we put that philosophy in place. So we're actually staffing to the demand. And then as the demand grows over time, we'll continue opening that window until it makes sense for us to add more personnel. Right now, it doesn't make sense. It's not cost efficient.
So you're staffing at 9 during your peak hours, and then off-peak?
7.
You're at 7?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Anything else before we move to police? Department? Okay, thanks, Pete.
Alrighty, on the police side, we met with Chief Silver for, Chief was gracious to spend almost 2 hours with us, so we covered a lot of things at length, so it was great. So we appreciate his time. On the nuts and bolts budget stuff, modest increase from the prior year, 2.5%. And regarding staffing looks to stay unchanged from 18 to 19. That's after adding a net of 2 officers in fiscal year 18. And Chief made a good point in our meeting that the net effect, if you will, of adding 2 officers is really like adding 1.7 officers when you take into account vacation scheduling, injuries, and those types of things. There was also a detective position created in fiscal year 18, and looking ahead, the total staff remains unchanged, as I said, but the desire is for the number of sworn officers to move from 33 to 35 at some point down the road. The overtime forecast was a concern in prior years, and that this year increased from 183,000 to 298 to better match what the actual dollars are spent each year. It might still be a little light, but it's a big bump in the right direction, and a marginal increase of 1.4% in operating costs. University Station obviously also has a big impact on the police department, and the metrics that we had for the data were from 2016. There's a lag in the data for it to be finalized, but the brass tacks of it was that 2016 saw a real flattening of impact from University Station. There was an increase in calls for service of only 5% in 2016 after a 61% increase in 2015. And all the other numbers sort of fell in line as well. 911 calls actually decreased 9% in 16 after a 14% increase the prior year, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's what 2016 saw for University Station impact. And he did note that as Phase 2 rolls out at University Station, that would probably result in another bump in calls for service and service for the police department. Moving along, the other big news, obviously, was the new police headquarters. The benefits are many. Chief could certainly expand on them far better than I could, but satisfactory locker rooms, community space, evidence handling, and interaction with the community, and many other things, many positives, which is great for the department and the community. One of the other things that we talked about, actually at great length, was the threats to the community, and what how well are we prepared as a community, as a public safety organization and all in the schools if we were to have an active shooter situation or some other threat. And some of the things that the chief covered with us is that his entire department went through active shooter training last summer. One of the folks on his staff is part of the regional SWAT team, so it's nice to have a SWAT member in-house. Other at-risk sort of identification initiatives are communication with other police departments, other towns, hospitals, mental health professionals, those types of things. Also talked about possibly the addition of a second school resource officer in addition to the one we have today. And most recently, the high school went with a locked door policy. The elementary schools have had locked doors now for a few years. So some good stuff on that. Some other things we talked about, the officers that, the 2 officers from last year, they've been successfully trained and assimilated into the department. There's 3 others at various stages of training in the academy now. The other thing, the benefits, the canine officer and bicycle patrol were proved invaluable in staying close to the community and patrol efficiency and community safety. And then lastly, on capital investment, it was 3 vehicles, some bulletproof vests, and tasers. So So really, it was a great opportunity to sit with the chief and go over some things, and so a lot of good in the department. So thank you, chief. And any questions?
Tom, we did, the municipal subcommittee was fortunate enough to get a tour of the new police station, so thank you, chief. I think we spent, 3 hours there? It was fascinating, though, but that was before the budget, so thank you for
Yes.
keeping us in touch
Good
on that.
stuff, good
Sorry.
stuff.
Tom, on your, the impact of University Station, your percentage increases, is that year over year or based on a 2015 baseline?
That's, the metrics are calendar year, right, chief? 2015 to 2016, so it's year over year, 2015 to 16.
Anything else before we move on to DPW? Great.
My turn?
Yes,
Um,
thanks.
By the way, in your printed copy, there's a duplicate basically of this slide. Just ignore one of those. We met with the DPW and talked about the DPW and sewer. It was a great meeting. I'd say I was impressed at the level of enthusiasm for their work that was displayed by the people I met with. That's always a good sign when they feel good about what they've done. Not to say that they don't feel constrained by their budget, some, but they displayed great enthusiasm. Talking about what was done in the last year, I guess there was a lot of repaving done. Probably not very glamorous work, but on the other hand, I think if there's a pothole, we notice. So that's a never-ending project. I learned a new word in this process, by the way, columbarium, which the first definition in the dictionary is pigeon coop. So I want to know why the town was opening a pigeon coop. It's the building in the cemetery that houses urns and so forth. But I guess it comes from the Latin for pigeon coop, so kind of interesting. Sewer, there's new stuff being done on the sewer. As a reminder, the sewer is actually in its own way a separate budget. It's funded out of sewer fees and has to maintain itself within that. So I did look that over, but it's separate from the rest of the budget. The overall budget increase is 3.5% to $5.7 million. Modest salary increases of 1.9%. The expenses are up a bit more than that, maybe a bit more than the average in the town. I'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the next slide. Staffing level, pretty level from previous years. Custodian electric costs, well, actually, I'll talk about it now. That's the real main impact on the budget, or one of the main impacts. We have a new police station, which is, I'm not sure the exact square footage, but quite a bit larger than the old one. We have a beautiful new fire station in Islington that needs to be maintained, that has a lot more work involved with it than we did. Even having said that, from my experience with custodial services, the town's getting a pretty good deal on what we pay, which actually surprised me given what I pay on my company's buildings for custodial services. Snow and ice, I will point out, we met before the last storm and before the next storm. We were doing pretty well. Snow and ice is always also a separate item. That's the one thing the town can borrow from the future budget for. Is that true, Pam? So I guess we'll have a reckoning on that. Certainly before town meeting, we'll have a reckoning. That might affect the overtime levels as well. I know particularly this last storm, there was a lot of trees down. I saw a tree getting removed over in Islington very quickly, so I may have been some extra overtime involved with that. I'm not sure. Solid waste and recycling, again, continues to be one of the biggest budget items we have. It continues to grow. We talked about that. We talked about the fact that sometimes loads for recycling can get rejected. We've been very fortunate. I think we just said we haven't had any loads rejected. No loads rejected, which is not the case for all towns. They get rejected because people put the wrong things in the recycling. And I think one of the goals for for next year will be to continue the education to make sure people don't put the wrong things in their recycling so that we can maintain that record as we move forward. Another major increase that you'll see is the I always get the initials wrong, MRWA. The MRWA assessment, we were hooked up to the MRWA for an alternative source of water. They assess us a fee. That has gone up. It's also offset by the increased fees we get from Westwood Station. So even though that's up higher, proportionally, people's water rates have not grown by the same amount that they would have if you just looked at that assessment. Energy savings, the department seems to take a very major effort in looking at how we can do various things to save on energy. I think that's borne results over the last 2 years and expect that to continue. My biggest serious issue with them was the fact that we don't have a permanent town engineer. I guess we've gotten by okay by using an outside consulting firm. It's a difficult position to hire. The downside is you probably don't have someone who's here just to kick ideas around with that you might have if you had a permanent town engineer. I did get the sense the department is open to hiring one, but it's a tough position to fill and you really got to get the right fit. And with the level of expertise we have now in the other senior positions, I don't think it's currently a problem. I just worry in the future if we have some turnover at the senior level and don't have a town engineer, that might be an issue for the town.
What was that cost for the engineering consultant versus whatever?
Do you know it offhand?
Exactly. What we paid out last year. 'Cause last year was actually, I believe we went about 7 or 8 months. I believe last fiscal year we went about 7 or 8 months without our former town engineer. And off the top of my head, I want to say that we had in savings from what we were going to pay that individual. It was over $50,000 because we were able to put that towards our stormwater capital request last year. And as of this current fiscal year, we had an agreement signed with our consultant. The first purchase order was for approximately $45,000, and we did an extension on that, an amendment to that contract, of which to date, I actually just received an email earlier today. I don't want to pull out my phone to reference it, but it was about, I think we spent about $6,000. So to date, about $51,000. And you know, we're hopeful that we'll have some savings that we can potentially put towards maybe our stormwater capital request of this year, as Pam was helpful last year in doing what we needed to do prior to town meeting. So, and I know that it seems eye-popping a little bit that we're operating without a town engineer, but at least for the past year and a half, we felt very comfortable in doing so. We're getting a very quick turnaround on any projects or requests or any planning board requests that have come in, and I'm seeing savings. And you know, Mike and I have had several discussions. As Howard had mentioned, we're not opposed to having a town engineer. It's just finding the right individual, and I don't really feel comfortable right now with the current pool of candidates that we've seen or know that are available. And you know, the ship is still sailing, and we've done things, quite frankly, at a faster clip than we've ever done with respect to getting things out the door, and again, responses to various boards and departments in town that have had inquiries. So, not saying it's a permanent model by any means, but for now, it seems to be working very well. So, and I'm not going anywhere soon either. So, don't think that's. I hope not.
The budget last year was for 43. A town engineer budget would be more like $100,000 a year.
Approximately,
Just
correct.
round numbers if you had one. So financially, it's not a real issue. It's just sustainability, whatever. Yeah.
If there was a hire for a town engineer, would that be a cost that you could share with the sewer department? Or you?
Absolutely. So within our FY19 budget, we already have a separate salary already built in. It would be the town engineer / sewer superintendent. And not to get too deep into the history, I believe I went over this probably last year or the year before, and/or the year before, but we also have a vacant strictly town engineer position that we're currently funding our on-call services out of. So we have the town engineer position that we're funding on-call services from, along with a town engineer slash sewer superintendent salary that we're currently just paying a part-time individual to fulfill a sewer superintendent obligation on a part-time basis. So there'll be salary savings out of that as well. So, I mean, if you go back about 6 or 7 years ago, it was a much different organizational chart from what we have right now. But again, we're not skipping a beat. If I noticed that we were lacking in some areas here or there, most certainly would address the situation right away, but it's working. You know, the team that we have right now they've definitely taken on some more additional roles, but it forced us to do that, and we're not losing sleep over doing it, so.
Can we get the next slide, maybe? Yeah, this is a little bit of a detailed breakdown on the budget. Again, not including capital. Outlined there are the police and fire station, and the biggest increase in there is what I talked about before, having to do with custodial and power services to those. The senior center has also been, I believe, a bit of a headache, and hopefully next year, I think on the plans is to do a fair amount of renovation in there, which may actually certainly save on energy and may in fact also save on ongoing maintenance. That's all right. I think unless there's any questions on the detail, we can just go to some of the things being talked about. Next year are new street projects. Obviously, we continue the paving. If you're going to have a pigeon coop, you need to irrigate it. So we're going to put in an irrigation system. I hope I'm not being disrespectful when I say that. The sewer again, very unglamorous, but we all really want it to work. So there's some equipment that needs to be purchased and upgraded, and that's on the plan for next year. I didn't go over some of the fields that have been improved last year, but next year there's a different set of schools that will be looking at the fields and see what we can do with them. Recycling days, I got a bunch of electronics I got to get rid of, so I'm glad about that. I talked about the ongoing education for recyclables and holiday collections for trees and so forth. And that's really about it. Council aging needs to be worked on, and I think that's in the works for this year. So it's a pretty, in some ways, it's a level set year for the department. But I think that's good. Again, it's not as glamorous as fire and police, but we all want to make sure that it works. In terms of capital, I don't have the number right here. I forgot to bring it, but there's 3 new trucks, and it's on a rotating 8 to 10 year cycle of all the equipment. Not getting any kind of new super duper equipment. It's just replacing older trucks that have worn out, and an 8 to 10 year cycle seems to be the appropriate one for that kind of equipment. And that was the major capital for the DPW for this year.
Question?
Any questions?
Is the significant increase with the police and fire, that's tied into the custodial? New custodial?
It is, yes. Both buildings, new and online. And I believe the police station, the custodial services are new to that entire, because Paul Joliker used to maintain the older police station, but with the bigger and more square footage. The custodial services that have done Carby and the other municipal buildings have now taken over that building as well.
Chris, do you want to do that, community and economic development?
Sure. Community and Economic Development Department is broken up into 7 divisions. It's building, planning, health, zoning, conservation, licensing, and housing. I met with Director Nora Loughnane, and we talked about last year's accomplishments and going forward, what their emphasis are. Fiscal year 19 budget increase, very modest 1.5% increase over fiscal year 18. It's a fully staffed department now. Years past, they were just coming online, kind of consolidating them, so a lot of new hires, new positions. But they're fully staffed right now. And according to Nora, don't see any changes coming down the line, any new positions needed. Last year's accomplishments has been mentioned earlier tonight. The fire station in Islington and the new police station have opened up. University Station Phase 2 is underway. The Brigham is not open, but it's not built, but it's in process. The Marriott in Del Frisco is recently built, and 100 condominiums by Pulte just approved by the planning board. Focus has been on town's recreational open space, and a survey went out. I'm sure all or most of you received those emails. Hopefully you filled that out. And the department continues to work with the selectmen and the developer on the Islington project. As you all know, it needs a 2/3 vote, given that it's a special permit at the May town meeting in order to proceed. Once that's been finalized and approved by the planning board. Two crucial needs that this project is hoping to address from the town's perspective are the town's affordable housing stock and albeit modest, it would be an increase in the commercial tax base. And as always, the planning department in particular, but all these departments emphasize community involvement for all the developments by everyone throughout the year, so that there is town input and we all have a say, an opinion is heard on all the developments going forward. At least an opportunity is offered for opinions to be heard. Two areas of focus going forward do relate to the Islington project, but in general, the whole town, it's a concern, and that is the affordable housing. Currently, Westwood sits at pretty much right at the 10% state mandated threshold. If the town goes below that by even 1, then it could be in jeopardy of hosting essentially an unfriendly 40B development for affordable housing. And the real concern is that for the 2020 census, Westwood Glen will no longer be counted as affordable housing due to a change in ownership of that development. And I can't, Mike, how many units are there currently? 156. So that will come off the books. It already has. So it'll be official, though, after the 2020 census. And with that, given that math, it will drop us to about 20 short of the 10%.
Totally figured it out, but it'll be 10 to 20.
Okay, somewhere in that ballpark. So the goal by this department and Nora is to try to make that difference up between now and the 2020 census, so that we don't fall victim to an unfriendly 40B development. It's a real department emphasis for the next 2.5 years, I guess, or 2 years.
A lot of those units could come from the Islington project if that goes forward.
Right. And that's what we mentioned before. That is one of the reasons the town is really interested in that particular aspect of the project. It really helps the affordable housing stock going forward, so that the rest of the town is not subject to something happening. I believe that development in Needham on 128 is a 40B development.
It is.
Yeah, and that's something that I don't think anybody in our town would enjoy seeing. Bill?
A question
Yeah.
on that point, Mike. So once the census is done, then the numbers are in. And with respect to a potential hostile 40B project coming in, is that something that can happen immediately? I mean, is there any grace period? How does that work?
No, there's no grace period. Although there are things you can do to, there are other measures you can do, and Sarah's working on one of them, which is to come up with a housing plan. If you have a housing plan, you can get a reprieve for a year. So that's one thing that we probably want to insert. The issue is that on the census, on the 10-year census, the denominator of the equation changes. It counts all the units that are in existence at that time. Then it's fixed for the next decade. You can continue to change the numerator, and that's the effort we'll have. We're told, Dan Bailey, for instance, is heavily involved in the development arena, and he tells us that there are particular builders that specialize in affordable housing that watch communities and watch for those times when they drop below. And when I say drop below, Canton, some years ago, got confronted with an unfriendly 40B, 1 unit short of 10%. And they had to consider it at that point. So if you are short and somebody inserts an application, you now have to consider it. You cannot deny it, because if you deny it, it'll go to the state, and the state's Housing Appeals Committee has a 99.9% approval rating. They'll just send it back to you and say, work it out, do something. So the best thing you can do at that point, if you get an unfriendly 40B, which we've had in the past, you'd negotiate something that is acceptable and something that isn't. And so, you know, that's kind of where we're at. Our efforts over the next 2 years will be to be at least 1 or 2 units above the 10%, so we're not confronted with that in the next decade. And then once we're above it for the next decade, anything we add to the affordable housing stock will just keep the percentage going up. But the point should be stressed, and I've stressed it many, many times over the years. You have to keep making progress because you keep getting to these decade counts where you have to achieve the 10% count, or you're subjected to an unfriendly.
Could I just ask a quick follow-up to Mike? Mike, how many of the 156 units at Westwood Glen were considered affordable?
100%. When it was built 100%, and then it was renegotiated 20 years ago, and it continued to be 100%. Most recently, then it became a market rate development, but it still had 40 units of subsidized housing, and so the state continued to count 40 units. To be honest with you, I'm not certain we would have held if that had been ever challenged, but they did. That will fall away absolutely. Well, it already has. They've taken those 156 units totally off because it recently sold to a market developer who is not including any subsidized housing.
But 156 was on our current decade numerator at one point.
It was, and it now came off. So it rarely happens, but this is one instance where we actually lost 156 units in the numerator during the decade. So
but we built up other affordable units.
Yeah, we had affordable. When we did
old.
University Station, when we did University Station, that's exactly what we did. We calculated that we knew we were at risk with Westwood Glen, so we calculated the number of units we needed down to and we had 1 more unit than we needed to be above 10% if and when they took Westwood Glen off. So we protected ourselves when we did that.
Thanks. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. Of the new Polta units, are any of those going to be low and moderate income? What, 25% or?
No. New Polta units, I believe. No, we negotiate. So when we negotiated in University Station, we wanted to get it above 10%. So we front-end loaded the affordable housing units that they were going to have to provide us. I think they were going to have to provide 15% of all the units they created. They created one building at 25% so we could count all 220 in that building, then 10% in the other building with 130, and 10% for any housing they developed after that. So of the Polta units, 10% will be affordable, or 10 units.
And Mike, just a thought, we've not had them here, but can you confirm that, I believe I've heard that in a unfriendly 40B, the development process is kind of taken out of the hands of the town? And that the planning board is not involved in design elements, and they're not necessarily held to the same standards that other developments?
It's not totally taken out of the town, and it's how the town approaches it. Some towns approach it by just simply litigating. They go to litigation immediately, and they fight the development. And so, the process goes on, they get rejected, and it ultimately goes to the state, and that pretty much sets the stage for what you're going to get. You're going to have very little impact on what the design will be. We have taken a different position right along for for over 30 years. We have decided not to litigate, but to negotiate. And we have negotiated with every developer who's come forward on affordable housing project to get a development project that works for the community. And a perfect example is back in the early days, Chase Estates and Cedar Hill Estates. Chase Estates itself was 330 units of condominium. This town didn't like condominium back then, still don't particularly like it, except, you know, on University Avenue, but I'm talking about in the main part of town, in the woods. And so over time, they negotiated that down to 100 units of single-family, you know, on quarter-acre lots development, and that really worked for the community. It's single-family homes and fit much better into the community than the attached units that were originally provided. So
But
it's
those were all
negotiated, not
friendlies. Those were all
no, Chase Estates wasn't a friendly
Oh,
when it
okay.
started. It
My
started
mistake.
out as unfriendly.
Okay.
May I follow up again? Is there anything that we can do or that we are doing to ensure that they stay low and moderate income into the future and don't fall off like Westwood Glen or anything?
Westwood Glen is a particular anomaly in the affordable housing arena. It was one of the earliest affordable housing projects in the state. Back then, there was some concern that there was not enough incentive for developers to develop these or to stay in the development, and there's some fear that they would lose money and that would cause them not to want to develop in the future. So the early ones had a clause negotiated in them that is an out clause for the developer, that after 20 years, they could decide to get out. So on those projects, developers could go market at some point. So when the 20-year clock ran out the first time, the developer went and refinanced with Mass Housing and extended it for another 20 years. Then most recently in 2013, when the clock ran out again, the developer, the equity, decided to just sell it on the market as a market rate development because that was best value. So we lost it that way. Highland Glen, which is a similar project, different funding sources, on the other hand, did not have that clause in the agreement. So the state has come up with a ruling that basically says if you relax zoning in order to create the affordable housing project, absent a clause in the agreement, remains affordable as long as the zoning has been changed to afford the affordable housing units to be created. So in fact, it's infinity. And so we won't lose Highland Glen like we did Westwood Glen. And it's due to time and that one clause in the contract.
What about the Pulte ones or?
All projects going forward now,
Same thing.
they're all infinity. We've learned our lesson. We never put that clause in anymore.
All right, the second area of focus for the coming year and a couple of years is the commercial development and the split tax rate. It's been brought up many times before, but just to reiterate, University Station, the development that size, brought our tax base up just 3% from 12 to 15. But we're still falling short of the state's recommended 20% in order to maintain the split tax rate so that the homeowners essentially enjoy less property tax. If we fail to continue, or if we continue to fail to achieve and maintain something at or close to 20%, then the average homeowner whose home, the average home value in Westwood is around $600,000, their property taxes could increase up to $1,200 a year. So if your house is worth more than that, just do the math. It'll go up more, by that value. So that is an ongoing concern by Nora and her department and the entire town. And it's a difficult thing with our property values for homes as high as they are, and very little opportunity to develop commercial tax base or increase our commercial tax base. So it's a real difficult thing for our town, and how do we achieve that? And it almost seems inevitable it's going to happen, but that's what they're working towards not happening, but it's a real Rubik's Cube right now. Mike, did you have anything to add to that? Okay.
Not at all.
All right.
Move on to culture, library and recreation.
Okay. In terms of the library is asking for a 7% raise, kind of above target, but in relative dollar terms, not a huge amount. When you look at the detail of it, there's some very legitimate reasons for the increase. First of all, anyone that's been to the library on a half-school day or when school lets out, you will see the level of activity, especially from young kids that are here. And so the library here is trying to be proactive and support that influx of people to get a part-time teen librarian. I think it's a good use of resources. Another aspect of the fact that the labor is up is a more accurate view on the budgeting sense of vacation and sick leave. If you look at those two particular items, and if you just set those aside for a second, the library budget would be requesting a 3% increase. So it's just really those two items that are driving a lot of it. The other thing that's interesting about the library is they need to maintain 16% of their total budget in library materials, and I've listed some things here like books and audiovisual and things like that. And that's very important to have an accreditation of your library, and it keeps us in the Minuteman Library Network, so anyone that's used that will know that that's a great resource for us. What's interesting about the library is just how the library is evolving through time, and Tricia provided us a lot of different metrics. Though circulation is actually slightly down, there's many metrics that show a very increased use of the library. The door count is up 6%. The use of e-content up 102%. And for those of you who may have used some of the things we list here, Overdrive, Hoopla, RB Digital, they're really great resources to have. Library program attendance, the different things for teens and adults too, is up 11%, and interlibrary loans are up 16%. So when you look at a lot of these different metrics, you'll see the evolving library and how it's changing and how it's trying to meet the needs of the town. So when we took a look at the budget and really tried to break it down and then looked at the metrics, we think that the 7% increase is actually legitimate and worthwhile. There are a couple of small capital projects that the library is getting that I list here. In terms of recreation, the rec department is a very interesting department in that it gets a lot of its funding from the fees that it charges. So they're really kind of a self-operating organization, and also contributing to the town because they do a lot of things to support, say, the pool area and different things like that. So the program offerings, I should say, that they have are expanding, and so is their budget in kind with that. But generally, they give back money every year, so it's a really positive win-win situation for the town. In terms of capital projects, they've got a couple. The pool pack to help the filtration and the dehumidifier in the pool. If you haven't been there, you know what that's like. And also doing some lighting on the tennis courts. And from what I understand, that's being funded out of the meals tax, one of the first things to use in the meal tax. And to me, there's some sort of synergy there. You go out to eat, and then you work it off by going to the pool or going to the tennis court. So it's really a good use of funds there. So very interesting group. Any questions on this slide?
How is it determined that there was a need for lighting at the tennis courts?
I think that's just something that they've had on the list for a while to have additional usage and time for people to play tennis. I think there's been a lot of meetings with neighbors and things like that. It's been a process that's been vetted through the town for a while. And from that process that's been vetted, they've come up with that need. Mike?
We once had 2 tennis courts that were lit in town, in Islington. Those 2 tennis courts were, one was lost reallocated because we were trying to make room for the Little League field to be able to be regulation, so it's going to rebuild. Then the other one was lost because we needed it for land for the Islington Fire Station. So at the time, there was some talk about restoring it. Most cities and towns around us, Norwood, Walpole, Needham, they all have lit tennis courts. Most of them have them at one of their schools, usually a high school. We held a meeting of the community, talked to them about various locations where we might put lit tennis courts, and the general agreement was that the one that was best suited, because it's larger land, it's more set back out of the neighborhood, was the high school tennis court. And so we've explored that, been talking about it for about 3 years now since we lost the one in Islington, and this is the year that we think we can go forward with the funding.
And I would also say that the type of lighting has improved since then. So the lighting that they're going to try to use is more of a downward-facing lighting that really helps the tennis court, but is not this big aura of light that hits neighboring people.
On your last one, you talked about assess the needs for developing recently purchased land next to the high school. Is anything on the radar?
There's some work being done. I was in that meeting, Pete, sorry to cut you off.
That's fine.
Working with some local youth groups, but there's nothing slated, as we understand it, to use that parcel of land. It's being explored. Do you remember which one that is between the church that we voted on a couple of years ago?
Any other questions? Okay, I'll go to general government.
Sounds good.
So we list all the different departments here in general government. I think last year I called it the kind of the backbone of the back office of the town. Really a lot of great things that are done by all those different organizations. The budget actually is rounded up to a 5% increase. I think it's 4.7. That's largely driven by some of the salary changes that have been proposed in this increase to get the town clerk salary in line with other town clerks at comparable towns. There's some other salary increases associated with the IT director, a little bit higher than average, but to be in line with the market, and some additional admin support, part-time admin support that's being requested. I think we could all say, as we look at some of the accomplishments here, and there's many more that have been provided to us, but a lot of great accomplishments that's been done by this overall group, getting in the new chief. That was quite a process. A lot of the new officers, a lot of applicants associated with that, and IT supporting all the new fire station and police station is quite an effort associated with that. And the new e-permitting solution has been working well for the building department. So in terms of the kind of future plans in the service plan, I won't really jump on a lot of the things that have said before about the housing authority and Westwood Glen, but certainly that's something that's going to be very important to the town. It almost at this point in time can't be said enough, but a lot of discussion has already been said on that, so I won't really elaborate on that. Any questions?
I just wanted to make a comment relative to the last point about affordable units. We talked a lot about 40B and the importance of being able to control a 40B project. And I just felt compelled to make the comment as someone who's lived in a 40B neighborhood for the last 16 years. How much having affordable housing in your neighborhood enriches your neighborhood and the lives of your family. So that's really been my experience, and I know that's part of what we're trying to work toward in Westwood.
I agree.
Okay, so I'll take the last couple of slides just quickly. And Barb, this hits the fixed costs we just laid out pretty straightforward, include those of the municipal budget and school committee, school budget, so the increase
Yeah.
of 9.6% encompasses both. 44% of that cost is attributed to the municipal employee population. But I think the costs are pretty straightforward, somewhat predictable, but there are assessments that influence pension and things like that, that are truthfully, I think, beyond the town's control. But where they can influence the costs, they do around healthcare and other things. Kind of in the cost of doing business category here. So just some summary, sorry, we took a good hour here. I'd agreed with Howard's point, I think we all would, that the department heads came very prepared, enthusiastic to share kind of what they've accomplished and where they're going. I think there's a tremendous amount of creativity around getting results within the budget and finding ways to change staff levels or use equipment differently or extend the life of things to keep costs down. There's definitely a trend, more and more data being available, which is nice to see. We have binders full. Sometimes it's a little overwhelming as we comb through it, but there's no shortage of numbers or information to show where we are. We do feel like at this stage, the public safety needs have leveled off a bit with the University Station. That doesn't mean they might not uptick again. So I think while there's no additional staff built into the budgets, there's a level of awareness that that could change heading into the next fiscal year. I think we as a committee would agree that the University Station development is a success for the town. I think that came up recently in a FinCom meeting. I think we would all agree, based on the numbers and the opportunity it's given the town through budget, it's been a great success. And then I think, while we can't get into all of the things that are done, I think there's a lot of, I know there's a lot of things done through the town that I would categorize as grassroots efforts that help support really the character of who we are, and things like Westwood Day, the flu clinics, the work the veterans do, and stuff that just happen by nature of what's important to us, what we value, and the people that make those efforts move ahead are very much appreciated. So while we focused a lot on University Station, public safety, development, and things that are really topic du jour, we do appreciate all the other work being done in the town, day to day. So that's it from us. Thank you.
Julie, thank you so much for your leadership of the municipal subcommittee. You can see how much work goes into this. Thank you, Howard Messing, Chris Paff, Tom Codera, Peter Lentz, for all your great work. And thank you to all the department heads who have worked with the subcommittee and who are here. Thank you very much for all the time you've given us to better understand what you do, and thank you all for what you do so well for our town. So thank you very much, all of you. With that, we are going to turn to the Education Subcommittee, chaired by Barb Delisle.
I think it's just this.
Lost half hour.
We're just going to inch along this bar here.
Oh,
Because
okay.
it's a Word document.
Okay.
Do you know how to do that, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can
Okay.
scroll,
Okay.
I think.
Let me,
No.
if not, I
No.
can do it from there. Do you want me to do it? Yeah, I hold this.
Okay,
And then
and then
scroll.
scroll, okay.
If it gets
Yeah.
complicated, I can do it from here.
I don't know, can I talk and scroll at the same time? Okay.
I think you can, Barb.
I wouldn't count on it.
Don't try
anyway.
it.
Well, you can follow along in your paperwork then. So we met with, my subcommittee met with Emily Parks, Heath Petrarca, and Abby Hanscom on February 26th. We'd been at the school committee meeting on the February 15th, and at that time, the school committee had voted their budget. and it was a little different than what was presented to us. So we went over all that, and I'll go over some of the changes and explain that. So we've been, you have all sat here and listened to Emily go through the whole budget, unlike on the municipal side where we haven't had the individual discussions in a full meeting. So I won't go through this in extraordinary detail because you've heard it all before. So the budget it's actually an increase of 3.36, which is just a scooch less than what had originally been proposed. It was 3.38. And so thank you to Pam, because the change was, you'll see on that bottom line, it says all other non-salary. If you recall, and it was as a result of last year's budget negotiations. Was it last year? Yeah. 2 years ago. There was some additional university station money that was set aside for the schools to cover some costs, of $150,000 for other costs that were considered like special, if there were special ed costs, and then also for a bus picking up the kids down at University Station. And that was a separate line in Appendix D. And it kind of wasn't in the school budget, and it wasn't in the town budget. And so this time around, Pam asked that the school committee kind of own that budget. The municipal side has voted that and is going to be funding it, but it's incorporated in their budget. So to make more sense, it really had to be added in last year's budget too. So the numbers are up just a little bit, and that gives you a larger base, and that ends up being when you do the numbers, it was a change of 0.02%. So anyway, so they now own that money in there. So here I'm. Okay, so the key thing is. I can't do this. Oh, the cursor has to be there. Oh. It's only going one way.
Yeah. Do you want me to do it? I can do it from here.
Okay.
Perhaps
Oh, I
I
kind of do.
can't, because I have to put it up. Sorry.
Okay. So, yeah, I need to look at that. I'm in this, and on the second page. So, yeah. So basically, this is really basically a level funded budget. There weren't a lot of changes to it. Is that okay? Okay. So I kind of defined the additions in 5 categories, kind of in line with the way it looked at last year's budget. The changes are contractual, enrollment-driven, sped-driven, enhancements of existing programs, and policy changes. The contractual side, 80% of it. Okay, I'm going in the right direction. Okay. No.
There you go.
No, I told you I couldn't do this. No, I can't get past that second.
Right.
Okay. So contractually, the salaries represent 86.5% of the budget, which is an enormous amount, and that's in line with most other districts too. This budget represents the 3rd year of the contract with the WTA. So come next spring, they will start negotiating the new salary for that. And that will be Emily Park's first WTA negotiation. They've got an excellent relationship with the WTA. So they're looking forward to that. So the amount that you see in the budget is basically COLA and steps, and steps are quite a significant part of the budget for the schools. The COLA was 2.5% over each year for 3 years. So they're not hearing of any extraordinary increases out there. So.
I'll do it.
Yeah, like, I see that little guy, and there we go. Yeah. Okay, so enrollment, and you looked at the enrollment trends as well, and that's an ever-moving picture. She had enrollment snapshots in December, and those had already changed by the time after she had presented her budget to us. So at individual levels at the elementary level. So the high school is basically, it's grown to about 1,015 students, and it will peak in another 2 years and then start going down. And just FYI, the high school is designed for 1,000 students because when you design a school, you can only use 10 years of projections. So back in the early 2000s, it was projected at 1,000. So it was pretty close. Thurston, it has peaked already, but there's still a lot of large classes. So it peaked a couple of years ago, but those big classes are kind of still working their way through. And then the elementary level has dropped by about 250 students. So the overall trend is flat. There really has been, the enrollment was 3,044 10 years ago, and it's 3,025 now. So, it's changed by 19 kids. But the issue is where it's dropping. So it's dropping at the elementary level and increasing at the high school level. It's easier to try to control class sizes at those levels because all of your kids in those grade levels are in one school. We then have the configuration that we have, it gets very difficult. So I'll kind of skip a little ahead. She was presented with a first grade that had they got 3 more kids in it than when she devised her budget at the Downey School. And then also at Martha Jones, she had a class that was like 25 or 24. It was just over the edge. But that's now, and who knows what's going to happen in September. But you can only change configurations based on the students that you have, not like if you're going to get that. So she looked at the budget and made a decision to add a class at the Downey in the first grade and at the Martha Jones at the 4th grade, and was able to do it being net neutral on the budget. She had already put in place extra aides and assistants to help in those classes that were bigger, and just by eliminating aides and adding a teacher, it kind of is 2 aides equals 1 teacher, kind of in rough math. And she was able to do that because she had the space. At Downey, the one thing is they're going to have to construct a wall to manage getting that space in place. So that's going to impact their capital budget. They're not asking for more money. As they said, they'll just have to make choices, and somebody just won't get something on the capital list. So they will achieve that. They're not always going to be able to do that because they don't necessarily have space. So one of the things that they're looking at, to the extent that it's being caused by University Station, is they've looked at creating what they call a buffer zone, which I know they do in Brookline. If you live in certain areas, the school is a core, and then you're in an area that they kind of mark it out, and the school district can decide what school you go to. It's like an area that, you could go to that one or this one. We'll decide based on population. And so they've decided that as kids come in, new kids come in, they will decide where those kids go. I'm not sure how. They think they'll probably be able to transport them through a van. So it would make sense, say, for those kids to go, new kids coming in to go to Deerfield, because Deerfield has really dropped in the number of kids. So that's the solution they have for now. They won't break up families or things like that, but at least that is one way they're going to deal with the changes along the way. Okay, here we go. Ooh, I did it that time. Okay, special ed. This is a very, very lucky situation on special ed, because that's where you've got highly variable expenses. And one student can really, if a student needs to go to a residential situation, the kid has to go. And that can be, this particular scenario of these tuitions, the first 3 residential day and collaborative, that represents 21 kids. So, you can see each tuition is quite substantial and can swing either way. But we've been very fortunate in that we've only had, we've had like 1 or 2 kids in residential, and day tuitions has dropped down, and the collaborative has gone up. And we're part of the education collaborative, and our tuition is greatly reduced. And in fact, we house some of the programs here. But that program has really stabilized and really helped out our kids, and it's an attractive program. And if you can offer it, and if it's equivalent to some of the day programs, then you can keep the kids in the system, basically. They still get a Westwood diploma. And then also, where a lot of the transportation, because we have to pay for that too, it's kind of cheaper, because we know if they're located here, or we know where they're located. It's because some of these schools are on the North Shore, they're quite a distance. So the way we've kind of mitigated these high costs is by designing really high quality programs. We started by contracting different programs, like the New England Children's Center was here and provided the autism program, and then we let that lapse, and we started hiring our own staff, and that's kind of turned into what they call the WABA program. And so if we can keep them in district, it's much, much cheaper. We have better control over the education they're getting. They're getting real Westwood educations, and it's kind of better to integrate them into the schools. And hopefully at some point maybe have them move out of the special ed and do some supports. I think it helps with the transition at going into the middle school, et cetera. So they will be adding this WABA program for another for 4 grades. It's going to incorporate, I think, preschool up until 2nd grade, and then the 3rd and 5th grade will be in a separate program. So that's going to basically be the equivalent of 1.6 FTEs at 96,000, which is really a great deal. And then to meet other kids in the district that have individual education plans, we need another 3.6 for there. They're also going to be adding a nurse at, there we go. A nurse at the high school that's a contracted nurse. The one downside, which it really isn't, my mother said, if you don't make it, you don't owe it, you don't owe taxes. We're not getting as much on the circuit breaker. But that's because we're not putting out, and there's a little bit of a lag on the circuit breaker. The state reimburses you for out-of-district tuition. They don't cover transportation. And it was supposed to be a program where they covered 100%, but it's never been funded at 100%. It was funded at 75%, and with more pressure on the state budget, they've reduced that to 65%. So we don't get quite as much, and it's still cheaper to keep them in, especially since we don't have the addition of the transportation. So as Emily said, there were no cuts and no additions to any programs, but there are enhancements to the program. So she's thrown in a couple things, none of which are extraordinarily large. An increase of a math specialist to full-time, a material manager they've got so many small things that go with all their science program that they've really beefed up, and they wanted to do this last year, so they can introduce that and increase some instructional assistant time by a very small amount. But probably the one thing is adding an ABA tutor for general ed. That's kind of exciting, because they're going in and working with the teachers and helping them with classroom management a little bit. You know, if some kid is particularly having some social problems and developing strategies for that, but working with the teachers and kind of teaching them how to deal with it. And then some curriculum resources and professional development. And I put in bright red because there's a cut in central office, and there's never a cut in central office. And I think they need to get full credit for this, that they're cutting the professional development coordinator to part-time, and they never get credit for that. So, let's see, almost. Okay, so then I looked at the policy aspect of where that affected their budget. So one was the class size. They did a review of the class sizes, and that, I don't want to say it backfired, but they kind of made a policy that they didn't really pay attention to. And I guess they kind of did, because they established assistants and all, but then they had to, it kind of crept up. And right now they have the advantage of having some space. At some point they will not have space, and they will not be able to do that, and you're going to start seeing that pressure. They looked at the fees, at the various fee structures, and purposely didn't do it during the budget season. They did it separately, so that it's not somebody saying, oh, let's cut the fees, oh no. You know, they seriously looked at the impact. And the kindergarten fees, I remember when those were put in place, and it was simply to be a budget stopgap, measure. And it didn't make sense, because every kid, it provides the kids with an extra hour in the day. Every single kid participates in that. So you might as well, but yet you always provide that opportunity in every classroom that, you don't have to do it. And it didn't make sense. And they studied all the other school districts in the area, and we weren't the most expensive, but it just kind of, our similar towns just didn't do it anymore, having a program like we did. If you had some people have a program where it's a lottery and it's not available to everybody, and then that made sense. But if you're making it available to everybody, it just didn't seem fair. So it ends up being $170,000 a year. So they're going to implement a 2-year plan. So this year, they're only charging half the amount, so they're cutting from the budget $85,000, and next year will be, or the budget is increased, I guess. You're not getting the offset in the fees, and then they'll do it again next year. And then one of the things that was budget transparency. And we've had that issue for the last couple of years. And we definitely noticed, and I'd given some advice on some aspects of the budget that were not transparent. And they started from scratch on their budget. And not entirely, everybody didn't, there are things that they didn't, say, well, we need this. There were some things that just matter of course went into the budget. But they did look at the utility budget. So now the utility budget was greatly inflated. And every time we asked what were the efficiencies you were receiving, nobody knew, because they didn't kind of want to talk about that budget. And what was happening is that the budget was, say, at a high level, they were paying down here, and then that extra amount was being used to fund something else in the budget. So now the budget is truly reflecting kind of what they're spending. They can have a better handle on energy efficiencies and all, and so it's just they're more conscious of it. The budget is making more sense to them. Now the one thing is the maintenance budget is always overspent, and they've not really bumped that up. but they're getting everything done. What happens is if they find they're not spending in some areas, they will spend more. It's the one discretionary budget they kind of have over time that they can spend. And between their capital and their maintenance budget, they get it done. It's not paying custodians and all. It's like their little projects that they do around the school. So, in a nutshell,
Bob, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How much was found roughly in the utility budget? I can't read the chart if it's on there, sorry.
I don't have the number, because utility, it was an up and down.
Oh, okay.
That's a conglomeration. It was, I want to say, 200,000. I can look in the book and
That's
tell you.
okay.
It was substantial.
Okay.
So they, yeah, it was something like, it was about 200,000. So, then their capital budget. Any questions in the meantime? On the capital budget. Okay, the capital budget, which is now being, pretty robustly funded. They're really getting to a lot of projects. At 867,000, I think they're not crying for any, they're not saying that they really need anything. They're meeting their day-to-day needs in the schools. Technology, they are expanding their one-to-one Chromebooks. They're now incorporating 3rd and 4th grade next year. So that's a robust program that they're very happy that that's the route they went. And no, the kids will not be bringing them home for 3rd and 4th grade. They will keep them in school. So they do, but they've had a good program of being able to replace them and upgrade them. Continuation of an upgrade of all the middle school furniture. They've got phased-in air conditioning at the middle school. They're adding to the roof reserve funds. I don't think they have a roof project this year coming up, but they're adding to the funds. The regular replacement of copiers, and then repair and maintenance includes they're doing, there's a lot of installation and upgrades of security cameras throughout the district. ID access, I think they're adding ID access at the high school. Energy efficiency projects, paving, the classroom set up at Downey for the WABA program, and then there'll also be that other classroom. Carpet replacements, floor replacements. They've got like 55 projects. And then also improving handicap access into the high school, so that the push bars are working, et cetera. So it was a real pleasure. It was, she's definitely got it under control, and I must admit that I don't feel we felt that we were dealing with a new superintendent. It was, very matter of course. No new initiatives on the horizon that we're seeing. There was kind of a wish list that was all over the place, but there was nothing that stood out that they know they want to do. They've just hired a new principal at the middle school, so there was nothing really at the middle school that was being added, and a little bit of it is wait until the new guy gets in and gets his feet under the desk. So their main focus right now is going to be the building project. So we did talk a lot about that. And I talked to Tom. I said, I'm not stealing Tom's thunder because he's doing the write-up on that article, but I did have a little more information on that. I know we all got the letter from Heath, describing it, which, I said, still, it seems very nebulous. I can't find this. Anyway, just went off into space.
It's the best slide in the deck.
Yeah. So I will definitely do PowerPoint the next time.
You've been
So-
saying that for 3 years.
I know. Well, I was just happy I got my Apple to convert to a DOS doc. So anyway, so the one thing that's a little misleading is, and I think that the warrant article is going to say that they want to borrow 1.75, but it's really up to 1.75. They're not really sure of the amount. So it ends up, and I gave you all copies of this page that came from the Mass School Building Authority. it ends up that they have, this is a project that is unlike any project that the town has done before. Working with the school building authority it's not like dealing with the grant on the library. It's not dealing with the fire station. You have to deal with this authority that they have board meetings, they vote all along the way, and so the whole project is set into 8 modules that are listed here. And, you don't even get into building until the building and the funding are module 5. This article will fund modules 1 through 4. And then then borrowing for the whole project itself will be happening at module 5. So you have to go through all these steps. And we had an invitation to come to join the eligibility period. So we're not actually even in module 1 now. There's a 270 days, so we're in the very beginning of that 270-day period. So we are meeting their timeline and providing what they need. Looked at the individual modules, 17 pages of instructions on one that I looked at, incredibly detailed as far as what you have to provide. When the feasibility study, it's the educational parameters that have to go into this are really, really detailed. So that enlightened me more on when it says that we have a project manager, the owner's project manager, because historically the project manager was like on the old high school we had a clerk of the works. He monitored construction. This, we will be hiring somebody to help us do all the submissions. And there's no way you could possibly, Heath and Emily couldn't be doing it all. They wouldn't be doing anything else but. So you hire somebody that knows how to do this, that can do all these schematics, that knows the system. You can't take one step ahead. You have to stay right where they want you the whole time. It made it very clear, like, when we first started looking at this project, how maybe we were getting ahead of ourselves. But as you go along and you meet all their criteria, then you meet their criteria to be able to get reimbursement. So I think we can have some comfort on this number, that we will be getting a deliverable. We will have made it halfway through the process, and it would be acceptable to the state. So that's really the key thing. It might not be quite what we expect if we were building something on our own, but it's meeting their requirements. And it is a 5-year, from this time now, 5 years out before we actually get a school. They've got a timeline that shows everything, how it's timed out. So essentially, they're ensuring that you don't get another issue with a high school construction project like we had with Alexander Construction. Anyway, I think that we can, I suggest you go to the school building authority website, and you will then be amazed at what's involved. And I kind of say good luck to Heath and Emily on it. It's really quite an undertaking to go through that. But anyway, anything else? Okay.
Thank you, Barb, very much for chairing the Education Subcommittee with your members, Cindy Buckley, Jennifer Perkins, and Mike Powers. Thank you all for your great work.
Yeah, you guys two don't show up.
And thanks to the school department leaders for all of their cooperation and help. So next on our agenda is financial planning. Sorry for the feedback. And you all should have on your desk the long-range planning subcommittee report, which Mike O'Hara put together. Mike could not be here tonight. Mike noted, as you will note if you look at it, that, and I think Pam can back me up on this, that there's very little year-over-year change in his report. So it's not my intention to go through this, but I certainly commend it to your reading, and I thank Mike for putting this together. Did you have any comment, Pam, that you wanted to make on it?
No, I looked at it with Mike going through, but as he's done in other years, he's kind of giving you a flavor for, what the town has in reserves accounts and progress being made on liabilities and pensions and kind of long-term projects coming ahead, so it's a great walkthrough of the overall finances of the town.
Good. Thank you, Pam, and thank you for your help in working with Mike to put this together. So I think we'll go right into OPEB with Rob. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah.
Get the fourth grader with the cold. Right, we should have the third graders in here helping us.
Yeah, and then, so he just turned it off.
Okay, here we go. So thanks. So I am the OPEB subcommittee, so it's kind of a glamorous title for me, but it's a person of one. So just want to cover a couple topics. One is a refresher of what is OPEB. It's a confusing subject for a lot of folks, so I'll try to simplify what it is, what it means to the town of Westwood, and what are the plans that we're doing to tackle the challenge. The data that I'll talk about during the report, a lot of it hasn't changed, and that's simply a fact that the annual, or we have a biannual actuarial report which talks about the level of liability that we do have here in the town. The last one was dated a couple of years ago. We're due any day for a report from our actuarial consultants. So the data I'm using is a little bit old, and if you recall from last year, some of the numbers are quite the same. So what is OPEB? OPEB is other post-employment benefits, and really it's anything that the town, for our employees, we promise them healthcare benefits and other benefits in the future that we are kind of accruing the costs for now, and these are real liabilities to the town. It's other because it does not include pension. So pension is a separate liability. It's handled and it's accounted for separate areas with different liability disclosures and funding requiremements as required by the Massachusetts and the authorities. Again, healthcare is the most common healthcare. Common benefit, but it also includes some other things like some life insurance for some employees. And why is this important? It's very similar to our national Social Security situation, where everyone talks about a big liability that we're accruing and we're paying it kind of as you go. Most towns here, most communities in Massachusetts are still on a pay-as-you-go basis. So we're only paying for our current year expenses. We're paying for our premiums for the employees. We're paying for any additional health care costs related to those benefits, but we are not, or many communities are not also accruing for benefits that are earned that will have to be paid in the future that aren't being paid today. So that's kind of the pay-as-you-go approach. That's what most communities are doing. Here in Westwood, we have started to do a number of years ago of kind of a two-pronged plan where we do the pay-as-you-go, so we're paying every year the expenses we incur, but we're also starting to fund our future liabilities. And so that's why, and it's important because this is a big number for future liabilities. So as a town, as of the last measurement date of our actuarial report a couple of years ago, we had a $35 million liability for unfunded, that's a net liability for unfunded benefits that we owe to our employees in town. So it's a big number, and this is a number that a lot of the communities across Massachusetts have to face, and it can be quite daunting. So what are the requirements? Currently, there are no requirements to fund, and so there's been a number of changes to the accounting requirements in the past couple of years. In particular, I'm sure you've all read very closely the comprehensive financial report that we published last year for the fiscal year. It was the first year where we discussed in great depth and had to were required to disclose in footnotes quite a bit of discussion about what our liabilities are. What are the plans that we have? What are the benefits, et cetera? And this year, for the fiscal year ended June of 2018, communities are required to put on the balance sheet the actual liabilities. And so, again, there's no funding requirements, but there's the disclosure was there last year, and now the on balance sheet and in the face of the financial statements, the numbers will be disclosed. So it's starting to get measured, get impacted, and it just shows you the heightened importance that it's taking on. So Westwood is in pretty good shape in terms of where we're heading, what we're doing about it. So we've been proactive. So as a community, I think we should feel good about that. Again, as we talked about, this report should be coming out any week. And of course, the liability is determined by a number of factors. We've engaged Siegel Consulting, which is one of the leading consulting firms to determine the actual liability. And it's based on, what are our plan benefits, what is the demographic profile of the participants, some of the actuarial assumptions in terms of, consumption of healthcare in the future, costs of healthcare being rising each year, what are the rates, the increases, and then your investment returns and discount rates. So there's a number of actuarial assumptions that go into it. So I frankly have no idea what the actuarial report will show this year. I don't think there's been a lot of changes to the benefits. I don't think there's been a lot of changes to the underlying number of participants. The discount rate may or may not change a little bit. The investment returns have actually been pretty good the past couple of years. So I'm not sure what will happen to the liability. I mean, it could change. I don't know if it'll change significantly, but that's something we have to wait for to see what the report will say. And then there is in addition to Pam watching this with her department, there is an OPEB liability task force here in town that does meet and discuss the findings of the Siegel actual consulting firm, and then discuss any changes that need to happen when appropriate. So that's something that'll happen probably shortly after we get the report in the near term. So what does this kind of mean specifically for Westwood? As I mentioned, our unfunded OPEB liability as of a couple of years ago was a little over $35 million. There were a couple of changes from the 2013 report to the 2015 report. There were some meaningful changes in terms of the discount rate. We were allowed to use a better discount rate because we had begun funding, so that if you, with a higher discount rate, your liability becomes lower. So that was important. But there were also some meaningful changes that we undertook to the healthcare plan in terms of the costs that we had, and we used some of those cost savings to actually start some meaningful annual funding of the OPEB liability. So the current liability is almost half and half. We have about 800 employees that are in either retired or still active employees that are in the plans, and it's about half are kind of retired and half are still active. So that's kind of the breakdown. So if you look at the liabilities between the two, it's almost half and half in terms of what we would owe for current retirees and what we'd owe for active employees. Yes, Howard.
That's a question. I just want to make sure it's clear. This says if we had 35.6 million sitting in the bank, we'd be fine?
From an actuarial perspective, yes.
Right, okay.
Doesn't mean it couldn't change.
Yeah,
And currently, we have, because of the funding that we started a number of years ago and because of the investment returns, which have been fairly good, we have about $6.7 million as of the end of calendar year 2017. So, and it's being managed by Mass Prit, so that's good. So we've made a meaningful step towards kind of increasing or reducing our liability and increasing the funding commitment to that. So that's a good, meaningful direction.
Question, it's
Sure.
a basic question. When you've got the retirees, when it says current active employees, those are the ones that are eligible for that's not all active employees, that's the ones that'll be eligible for these health care benefits when they retire?
Eligible.
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
So, what is it? Is it in line with the pension benefits? So is it 10 years that you get vested when you get your, when you get retirement, or does everybody qualify for the health care benefits?
Yes, so that's a state law, kind of who's eligible or not
Yeah.
for benefits, but it is, right now, it's, if you retire from a pension system, the state or Norfolk County or state teachers, and it's 10 years, 10 years service and 55.
Okay. Thanks.
That's something that the state has kind of looked at, that maybe, that needs to be adjusted.
Right.
As a cost control measure.
Right.
Or phase in the benefits.
Okay.
Sorry. Or phase in the benefits. So if you work for 30 years, you get certain healthcare benefits or a certain percentage. If you work 10 years, that might be different.
So this slide I borrowed from Pam's presentation. And this shows the annual funding that we've made to the OPEB fund over the past few years. So this is the how we've got to the $6.7 million that we have in the current trust fund. We started making the commitment very small amounts in fiscal year 2011, and then we had a couple of meaningful increases, as I mentioned, about some of restructuring and savings and healthcare costs that we were able to achieve, and use those savings to begin to fund on an annual basis the trust fund. And so over the past couple of years, we've particularly since 2016, in line with the actuarial report that we've received, that would make a recommendation to have a 30-year plan to tackle and to eliminate your liability. They recommended that you fund about $1.3 million a year with increases every 4 years or so, in order to eliminate your liability after 30 years. And so the Board of Selectmen at that time made a commitment to say, yes, we'd like to adopt that plan as recommended by the actuarial consulting firm, and have been diligent in doing that each year. And so for the current fiscal year, or for the next fiscal year, we will be budgeting for a little over $1.4 million, which is a little bit of an increase from the prior year, 1.3. And so it just highlights the commitment that we're making to it, and the importance we're putting on this to stay with our plan to meet our obligations and eliminate the liability over a 30-year plan. This is just kind of a little bit of a detail. As I mentioned, the Board of Selectmen is committed to fund this OPEB liability a few years ago. The funding this year, keep in mind also this funding this year, this $1.42 million that's in the budget, that doesn't include the pay-as-you-go. So we'll be paying another close to $2 million for the annual costs that we're incurring. So this is the 1.42 is the pure amount that we can put into the trust fund for the future liability. So it's really great. As I mentioned, most communities are not doing that and being as proactive about it. As I mentioned, the 30-year funding plan is set by the actuaries. It started at $1.35 million, and it goes up a little under $110,000 every 4 years is the increment. And so we've been trying to tackle that instead of being flat and then jumping every 4 years. We've been making small increases each year to tackle that. You can see on detail if you want to look at these numbers. There's a lot on there, but this is essentially the 30-year projections from the actuaries about how we go from what our liability is today. Basically, the bottom right-hand column you'll see after 30 years if all the assumptions are correct and all of our contributions stay according to plan, we will be at the liability will be matched by our assets, and it will be fully funded at that point in time. By the way, if anyone wants to look at any of this report in detail, it's about a 30-page report from Siegel Consulting. It's on our website in town here under OPEB Liability Task Force, and so it's all the information is there, and I'm sure when the new one is published, that'll be put up on the website as well. So our conclusions: one, I really think that we should feel good about this. I've been on the FinCom here for a few years, and I remember when we first started to discuss this issue, it seemed like a really kind of daunting, insurmountable problem. And we've made great progress towards it. The town has been very proactive. I don't have the numbers here, but I was flipping through a PEREC report. Massachusetts loves these acronyms. I think it's Public Employee Retirement Assessment Committee, something like that. Accounting committee, but anyways, PEREC oversees a lot of the plans, and they're overseeing the OPEB efforts from the town. Since they had a report that they published that they said was last updated in May of 2017, I think it was, so a few months ago. And it was it kind of measured all of the entities that have OPEB liabilities and what the entities are doing about it. There was about 400 entities, so it's not all towns. So it's towns and it's water districts, it's vocational schools, and a couple of electric districts, et cetera. There's about 400 entities, and of the 400, only 31% or so had begun funding their liabilities, and so less than a third. And so we're in the third. We should feel good about that, and more importantly. Less than the average was like 5% funded. 5% of the actuarial liability had been funded, and if you look at our $6.7 million that we have in our trust fund so far, that's over 15% of the unfunded liability of the actual liability is funded for, and so I think that's much higher than the average. If you were to look at the other towns, there are some towns that have higher numbers. I think they've used some overrides to get there, et cetera, but We are, and if you exclude some of the vocational schools, and if you exclude some of the water districts, which are different animals, we're in the top 10 in terms of our funding percentage. Some of this data is a couple years old, but, as of the measurement day, we're in the top 10 in terms of our funding, so a percentage of the actual liability that we've been funding. So we should feel really good about it. And it was a great step by the Board of Selectmen to say we have this commitment and we're going to tackle it and we have a plan to do so. And so just, credit to Pam and everyone in town that's made this effort. Keep in mind, these are still expensive benefits, and so there's two ways you can tackle it. One is to start the funding and put the money aside. The second one is to continually manage your costs and see if there can make the tweaks or changes to any of the programs. Not always easy to do, particularly for current retirees, et cetera, but there are some things that, if there were drastic changes in the liabilities, there are some things you can tackle the expense side as well as just the funding side. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. And I think that's really it. I mean, it's the next thing to look for is, as I mentioned, the actuarial report that comes out any day now, and so we'll look forward to that. And then we'll meet with the liability task force and see if any changes need to be made. But again, the conclusion is I think we're in good shape. We're on the plan to eliminate the liability, and the Board of Selectmen is committed to that plan. So happy to answer any questions.
It's kind of not, it's more of a Pam question. Are we aware of other entities that we're involved with, like, say, Blue Hills, what they're doing about theirs? Because that could impact us down the road if they haven't been funding their liabilities and suddenly they start having to, and by trickle down, it's going to affect us. I don't know if Dedham Westwood Water would affect us, I guess in rates. But I was just wondering if we're aware of how some of those other.
I know that Dedham Westwood and Blue Hills are both, kind of doing a lot. They're I don't know if they're quite on target where we are, but they are doing annual funding built into the budget every year and addressing.
And I don't know is there anybody else that you can think of that would have impact on us?
I don't think anyone else that would come back to us at some point through an assessment or something. No, but as Rob mentioned, we all, with the FinCom, spent a lot of time on this a couple of years ago, and it was painful to get started and get going, and really with the work of the Finance Commission and the Selectmen and everyone, we've really made great progress, and have really just made it kind of a routine item in the budget, which is what it has to be, just to kind of, tackle the problem.
Yeah, just to follow up the Blue Hills specifically, according to the PARAC report, they have not started funding, but the liability is not as big. It's an $18 million liability to be spread across all the communities, I guess.
Yeah, we're the smallest
But
ones.
this might, again, this is a couple years old, so they may have started funding more recently than that.
Well, thank you to the OPEB subcommittee.
And all its members.
Shouldn't he have, isn't that the Pete Neville Memorial Chair he sits in?
We still honor Peter Neville, but thank you to the OPEB subcommittee, AKA Mr. Ewick. Thank you very much, Rob. And Pam, thank you very much.
Yes,
I
thank you,
think
Pam.
the progress that Westwood has made is largely due to your great work and your great staff. Thank you for all that you do. It really makes Westwood a town we can really be proud
Thank
to
you.
live in.
No, and I want to thank you for all of the reports tonight. They were excellent, and just excellent summaries of all the budgets that you've gone through. And I do, want you to know that department heads love meeting with you. They love going through all of the material, and they really greatly appreciate the time you spent on that.
Is that why
when you
Chief
talk about
Deckers
their
is smiling so
enthusiasm.
much? Is that why Chief Deckers was smiling?
No, they do. They really, and so to hear the feedback and the understanding of the budgets is wonderful. They really do appreciate that. And I think, Marianne, as you talked about the progress we've made, to sit, and there's a lot of you who have been long-term members, to hear the reports back and really see the progress that's been made in certain areas, building maintenance and public safety staffing and OPEB and, things like that over the last 5 or 6 years. Really, the town has made some great progress. again, with everyone's help, the selectmen and the school committee and the finance commission, some of those areas that were really problematic. Just every year we're doing better and improving and moving forward, and you're really seeing those in the results, kind of what you're reporting back. So thank you for that. And I just want to mention one thing, if I can, just 2 quick budget updates. Did you have a
Please.
chance,
I
Jane, to
did.
send out?
Yes.
So Jane sent you out, the selectmen at their meeting last night just did 2 final budget items for your hearing next week. It's really been a year where there's been relatively little change in the budget kind of throughout the process, so the numbers for most of the articles have not had any change. But the selectmen last night did finalize Articles 1 and 2, the budget supplements for the current year. And so that was included in what Jane sent out to you. Really very small and very routine, with the exception of snow and ice. The snow and ice has turned into a pretty big year, so you'll see some big numbers there as we try to cover the full spending with that. But other than that, very minor in the Article 1 and 2. And then in the operating budget, just 2 updates. And it's a year where they both swung the right way for us. We got our final Blue Hill School regional assessment. That's a number that we just estimate in the budget process, and then we get the final. We just got that last week. It's a little bit down, actually, from FY18. The number of students has dropped a little bit. We never have too many students, usually 6 to 10. The number dropped, I think, from 8 to 7, so our assessment went down a little bit. And then our health insurance budget. We had an estimate in for about a 6% increase. We did get the final rates, again, just in the last week or so from the GIC Commission, and the rates are actually going to be very low for FY19. The average rates for the different health plans are about a 2.5% increase. A couple of the plans have a 5% increase, but they're not the more popular plans that our members are on. So when we ran our new numbers for the health insurance budget, we're able to take that budget down from our estimate in the plan by about $200,000. So between those 2 items, the Blue Hills and the school committee and the health insurance, that's the only 2 items that have changed in the budgets that you've been reviewing. But the selectmen last night did look at that savings, so we have a budget savings in FY19 of about $220,000. And they did vote to increase our snow and ice budget by $150,000. So currently it's $300,000. And some of you who've been with us for a long time will remember for years it was $150,000. When University Station funding first came in, we increased it to $250,000. We know that our average spending is about $450,000. So it's been our goal to try to increase. I think it was 2 years ago we took it up to $300,000, and that's our current budget. But the selectmen would like to use this opportunity to increase that to $450,000. It just gives us better protection for knowing what we are normally going to spend. If we have a great winter with no snow, we don't spend the money and it goes back into free cash. But they did vote to make that change in the proposed budget. And then the other $70,000, they did vote to add to that other reserve account we have in the operating budget. There's the Finance Commission reserve at $400,000, and not a change to that. That reserve is set by the state for anything that comes up during the year that's of an emergency and unforeseen nature. So we work real hard not to use that during the year to make sure that we're kind of, preparing for things in the budget.
And that's where you would normally come and get the snow and ice from?
And then we normally come at town meeting and use some of that money for the snow and ice. And we have this year, you'll see that in Article 1, $200,000 from that reserve to fund snow and ice expenditures in the current year. And we always leave about $200,000 because in case anything might come up between now and the end of the year and June 30th, we would have that account. But there's been another reserve in the budget for the last couple of years that the selectmen have, $225,000 that they can use during the year to supplement. It originally started as an energy reserve for spiking energy costs. They've used it in recent years to, if we have some of those green, the state green programs, the green energy programs sometimes come along and we need a match. We have to match maybe $40,000 to get a grant. They did just use it recently to match the aid to the elderly fund, what was raised in donations. So they have a reserve. So they'd like to use that other $70,000 and add to their reserve to make that $295,000. So with the increase to that and the snow and ice budget, really just gives us a little bit more buffer in the budget. to accommodate things that come up, puts less pressure on us trying to find those supplements for the snow and ice, or to use free cash to supplement snow and ice during the year. So that is in what Jane sent you. We just have a little memo that outlines those changes, and then we have a new Appendix D document that reflects those changes. But other than that, there's not anything that's changed in the operating budget or the capital budget from what you've already had and been working on and looking at.
That's great, Pam, thank you.
Good.
Any questions for Pam? No, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Very much. So folks, we just have a little bit of business left. We've actually made really good time tonight, which is great. I'd just like to go over the article write-ups with you because we've had some changes to the warrant, and some articles have gone off, some articles have come on. I have the list in front of me. I don't know if you folks do, but please be listening because we have 3 articles that need an owner or an author. So by my count, there are 21 articles on the warrant, which not bad compared to other years. The first 9 are the financial articles, Board of Selectmen financial articles, capital improvements, supplemental appropriations, etc. Jane and I are going to take care of those. Then we have the OPEB article, which Rob will be writing. Road improvements, Jane and I will do that. The school borrowing for the MSBA eligibility process, Tom Kilgariff is writing that. And then we've got the Islington articles, the Board of Selectmen authorization for disposition of the municipal property, that's Chris and George, along with the Selectmen article with respect to the redevelopment of Islington, including Wentworth Hall. Again, Chris and George. Chris and George are also handling the 2 planning board zoning amendments relative to that project. So that's a lot of work, and thank you both for doing that. George cannot be here tonight based on the rescheduled date, but I've been in touch with him. Let's see. Housekeeping planning board. We don't have anyone on
They're
that.
going to just hold that until they don't think they're going to have anything right now. So
Okay.
they're just
All right, so we
gonna
won't
hold
worry
that
about
until-
that.
Yeah.
So we do need one for this abandonment of portions of Hedgerow Lane. Actually, let me hold that. Let me tell you who's doing the other ones, then we'll go back to the 3 we need. So we've got Chief Decker's article with respect to the fire hydrants. Peter is writing that up. Thank you, Peter. We have the petitioner's article regarding the FMUOD 6 and 7. Mike O'Hara is writing that. Okay, that covers what we have, and we've got 3 that we need authors for.
Excuse me, just
yeah.
Peter is also doing.
Oh, I missed it.
Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry,
That's okay.
Peter. We missed, you're also doing other capital improvements. Sorry about that,
Yeah.
Peter. Thank
Good.
you.
No.
Thanks, Jane. Okay, so the abandonment of portions of Hedgerow Lane as a public street and authorization of transfer of land within the current right-of-way to owners of abutting property, which will be presented to us by the Board of Selectmen next week. We get a volunteer, maybe?
I'll do that one.
Jim? That would be great, thank you. Then we have 2 more. The Board of Selectmen appropriation article for a comprehensive study of security needs for school and municipal buildings. Any volunteer on that? Maybe someone who hasn't been mentioned.
I'll do that.
Howard, thank you very much.
The one I was signed up for got pulled, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
I know that you had volunteered for others that went by the boards.
They'll pull this one too.
And the last one is affordable housing appropriation. Is Wes still here? Wes, would you mind? That would be great. I just couldn't see you over there in the corner. Okay, so I think that covers that. You know, in terms of the Islington articles, the planning board is meeting tonight. to discuss that further, and we will be hearing from Abby in the meantime in terms of where that's at. In addition, the Board of Selectmen are meeting on Friday morning, I was advised. They're going to have a meeting, so if you have time to catch that over the weekend. But we will, I was told we will be getting an update likely on Friday afternoon about that. So as far as next week goes, as you know, we've got Monday and Tuesday set aside. Although in some years we've been able to get our work done in one night, I think we should plan for both nights, just to be on the safe side, as we've noticed. We've got a number of things to talk about, which have not yet been presented to us by the selectmen and the planning board. And I want to make sure we really thoroughly vet that. Hopefully we'll have a number of community members here for that discussion. I think it's important we hear from them. I just wanted to get your sense in terms of articles that we've already heard on. We just went over some of them. We've gone over the financial articles. I'm sure Pam will give us an update. But the other articles, for example, Chief Decker's article, the petitioner's article, do you feel a need to have a hearing on those again, or to leave that, as needed in case people have questions? My thought was that we don't need to have a hearing on those issues again, but I just wanted to raise that now. Do people feel comfortable with that as a plan? Okay, okay. I mean, I think there will be an opportunity, and, clearly, residents might raise questions on articles that aren't discussed for the first time, and that's fine, and we can field those questions and comments as they come up. But I think what we'll do is plan to focus on those articles that we haven't actually heard in hearing yet. And that's going to be, a bit to deal with as it is. Any other comments, questions?
Are you still planning on meeting earlier on Monday?
7 o'clock, both nights, just to give us a little bit of more.
Any chance we're going to have a weather event?
I mean,
Sunday? Yeah. Jeez.
is that true?
Yes.
Yeah, they're saying maybe next week.
They said we're still in this pattern, whatever that is.
Never ends.
Wow.
It's like Groundhog Day. Every day.
Since February, or whenever the first one was.
Oh, sure.
February 2nd, Groundhog Day.
This Friday.
Yeah.
So Jane asks if we could please have the subcommittee written reports by this Friday. And also just to remind you that when we have our hearings next week, Monday and Tuesday, Jane will then need our write-ups by Friday. And we'll be working on those over the weekend. I think they've got to go to the printer on Monday,
Yes.
thereabouts. So,
Yes.
So that's all I've got. We've got a lot of work to do in the next week. So eat your Wheaties over the weekend. Get your rest. Any other business, questions? Public and press? Chief, anything?
I'm all good.
You're all good? Thank you again for being here and for being our last audience member. Is there a?
It's his first year, it's novel for him.
Yeah. We'll never see him again. Can I just say thanks to Jane? She was a tremendous help for us trying to get with all the department heads. It's no
Thank
small
you, Jane.
task to align schedules.
You guys were amazing.
Places and
You
stuff,
guys were
so.
amazing.
And dealing with snow delays.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys
And
did amazing
overages
work.
and when we talk too long, but it really is a sprint and she helped us navigate that
Pleasure.
flawlessly. So thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
amazing.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Why did he go to that trouble?
There is a second. All in favor? Aye. Thanks, everybody.
So I started the write-up last one.